So, you've probably heard of instances where people have perfect recall of events in their life, or can recite pi to 100 decimal places without any memory techniques, and as a result you might envy their talents. But when you actually examine the lives of these individuals and the costs associated with their talents, you slowly become aware of the problems associated with possessing such capacities. As you watch this, you'll become aware that there are no outright positives, only trade-offs to possessing a perfect memory, and that possessing one isn't necessarily adaptive for everyday life. Firstly, for example, those with photographic memory suffer in a unique way. In Slate, a college student, Alan Nielsen, explained that there are both upsides and downsides to having a photographic memory. Here are examples of what he can remember. I can vividly recall sights and sounds into the tiniest detail without even concentrating. I can visualize people I have seen for even just 5 minutes. I can even recall such small details as jewelry, hairstyle, and makeup. He then gives an example of problems that can be caused by having an excellent memory. Sometimes I can't control when I visualize memories. I sometimes tend to visualize the equations and formulas a math teacher presents in class in real time. That can easily make me want to visualize the equations with various different combinations, and therefore render me much less active in lessons. So basically, he is constantly distracted by his abundant memories that appear before him. Finally, he explains why he's not a straight-A student. The simple answer is that the photographs in my memory are so fragmented and so cluttered that it consumes a whole lot of my energy just to visualize one chosen memory. Perhaps you can visualize this as being an unorganized photo album with literally millions of photographs to choose from when looking for the right memory. The problems that arise in this situation is that every instance or permutation of experience is remembered as unique and entirely uncorrelated to other experiences. The individual with the photographic memory therefore is unable to generalize ideas or produce an abstraction. For example, Jordan Peterson talks of Temple Grandin, a famous autist and professor who, when asked to think of something like a church, she must think of an actual example of a real-life church, not an archetypal example that you or I would think of, that being just a generic church with a steeple, etc. Every church for her is unique.
Well, what Grandin said was that when she thinks of a church, she has to think of a church she's seen. She can't take the set of all churches and abstract out an iconic representation and use that to represent the set of all churches. She gets fixated on a specific exemplar. And she thinks that one of the problems with autistic people, and they have a very difficult time developing language, by the way, is that they can't abstract out a generalized representation across a set of entities. They can't abstract. And of course, if you can't abstract, then it's also very difficult to manipulate the abstractions. And you see very strange behavior with autistic children, for example. So they don't like people. And that's because people don't stay in their perceptual boxes. Like a human being is a very difficult thing to perceive because we're always shifting around and moving and doing different things. Like we don't stay in our categorical box.
This kind of partitioning of instances also extends interestingly to people's faces, as Jordan Peterson notes, with each facial expression being seen by those with a gifted memory as being an entirely unique face. Consider this picture, with each expression being remembered by those with photographic memory not as part of a singular face, but rather as an entirely different person unrelated to the last expression, and you'll better understand this concept. An interesting individual related to this named Solomon Shereshevsky, a Russian journalist who came to prominence through an anecdotal account in which he was told off for not taking any notes whilst attending a work meeting in the 1920s. To the surprise of everyone there, and to his own astonishment in realizing that others could apparently not do so, he was able to recall the entire speech word for word. Unfortunately, Solomon's memory gift was a serious handicap. He was unable to block unwanted memories. Also, he had a terrible memory for faces because he memorized them so exactly. People's faces changed with time, lighting, mood, and expression. Solomon had difficulty recognizing faces because they looked so different to him from the ones he had completely memorized in the past. He is quoted as saying that they're so changeable. A person's expression depends on his mood and on the circumstances under which you happen to meet him. People's faces are constantly changing. It's the different shades of expression that confuse me and make it so hard to remember faces. If you think about this, it would be quite frightening with loved ones looking like complete strangers, and if you extrapolated this to a situation such as a classroom or lecture, where every day and perhaps every minute it feels like as if there are new people sitting around you as you see different faces. It was suggested that Cheryshev had an extraordinarily strong case of synesthesia, the heritable condition in which the senses become intermingled in the mind, and this potentially had something to do with Cheryshev powers of recall. Cheryshev associations were so strong that they frequently impacted his everyday life. One time I went to buy some ice cream. I walked over to the vendor and asked her what kind of ice cream she had. Fruit ice cream, she said. But she answered in such a tone that a whole pile of coals of black cinders came bursting out of her mouth. I couldn't bring myself to buy any ice cream after she had answered in that way. What's more, these images forced Solomon into a world without abstraction. Even basic concepts like nothingness, easily understood by young students, were incredibly difficult for him. What could not be visualized did not exist. So he essentially thought only with pictures, unlike others who think usually with words, so anything that could not be seen appeared foreign or beyond his capacities for comprehension. Despite his great talents, Solomon eventually faded into obscurity and was assumed to be a taxi driver before his unremarkable death in approximately 1958. Another individual with perfect memory, Jill Price, suffers from a gift because she is not only unable to forget, but is also constantly bombarded with fragments of memories, exposed to an automatic and uncontrollable process that behaves like an infinite loop in a computer. Sometimes there are external triggers like a certain smell, song, or word, but often her memories return by themselves. Beautiful, horrific, important, or banal scenes rush across her wildly chaotic internal monitor, sometimes displacing the present. All of this incredibly exhausting, says Price.
To forget.
Because you said at one point that we have no idea how much of ourself is created by editing our memories.
Right.
And to shape ourselves.
Right, and I don't do that. Like, I still feel bad about stuff that happened 30 years ago.
But we all do, and I mean, we can all remember one or two things.
It's not one or two things, everything. And I really like live it and feel it. And I think, God, if I had just done this, then I wouldn't have done this, and I wouldn't be here, and I'm always constantly doing that.
And to those thinking that Price can achieve practically anything with a near-perfect memory, well, her memory actually seems to relate to episodic memory, which is a memory for personal events, such as Price being able to remember past mistakes she has made or events that have happened to her. But as she says, it's not just a memory, but the associated emotions such as regret, fear, or embarrassment that for the rest of us fade. This is compared to semantic memory, of which Price's is only average, which is composed of facts that are unrelated to everyday life, such as knowledge of the world, maths formula, or vocabulary, which along with possessing a high IQ would actually enable her to excel academically. So, overall, the ability to forget can be considered adaptive for us, not only because obviously certain memories are either too mundane or not useful to remember, but also because forgetting is necessary for us to forgive other people and also to forgive ourselves, as is the case of Jill Price, who could not move on from her past mistakes because they remained so vivid in her mind. But also because, as is the case with Solomon, endless associations between thoughts leave us without an imagination or an ability to interact completely with each moment as we exist in it. We are no longer able to live in the present because everything we see produces a memory, and that memory produces another memory ad infinitum. To sum up, intelligence involves more than remembering lots of stuff. It also involves the ability to apply knowledge and skills. An overloaded brain may not be able to do that effectively.